Well, we left off looking at a variety of different species interactions, and the first one we're going to look at is the idea of predation. So this is where you have a paired relationship between predator and prey, and we'll be looking at a variety of examples of predator and prey. But obviously, the predator is the hunter, and the prey is what is being hunted, or the food. Prey acquisition would be just the strategies, the skills, the different attributes that a predator has to increase its ability to acquire prey. And then predator avoidance is those strategies and abilities and skills that prey have to avoid predation. Um, uh, One other type of, so when we talk about species interactions and competition, you also have like interspecies or intra-species competition where uh, the same species are competing for access to mates and other resources to survive. So again, some more males fighting, and they have different they might be prized on the size of their gills or uh, the best color display. This is an example, if you can see in the image, an example of prey or predator avoidance. So where you have this well camouflaged bird in this dried grass. Here you have an example of a plant species hiding from predators or herbivores that might consume it. So the plant has grown in such a way so that it looks or blends in to the rocks that it dwells within. Here you have an example of a leaf mimic, or basically an insect that hides just in leaf litter but exists there. Here you have a scarlet king snake, which looks like a coral snake or has similarities to it, but the coral snake is the poisonous one, and then the king snake is just a mimic, trying to mimic those same coloring differences. Another species interaction would be parasitism, and this is where you have a parasite and a host, the parasite being smaller than the host and basically hitching a ride or getting food through another organism. And they do play a role in controlling population size. So if a population gets too large, often parasites will limit the overpopulation of a population. Here you have an image of a tapeworm, and how a tapeworm works is it kind of clings. It's basically the mouth parts that have kind of these barbs to the intestines of an organism and then absorbs nutrients through its body segments. Here you have an example of mites that live or dwell within the trachea, so the breathing tube, of a honeybee. Okay, another type of symbiotic interaction would be mutualism, and mutualism is the idea where both parties involved in the relationship get something out of it. So pollination, mutualism, so the idea of like honeybees and other insects and birds and bats that get nectar from plants also assist the plant by by pollinating plants or moving their pollen around. Nutritional mutualism, the sharing of, so if you think of coral is a good example of nutritional mutualism, where one gets a safe home and the other one provides food. A lot of ruminants, so like cows, other organisms that have multiple guts, they utilize bacteria and small microorganisms to break down the plants in their gut, and then they release the nutrients to the animal, and the animal provides a nice warm environment for those organisms. And then, I guess that's gut inhabitant mutualism. Nutritional mutualism could be the example of the rhinoceros there with the birds on its back. The birds eat a variety of pests off of the rhino, and the rhino gets the reduction in pest issues. So this actually goes back to the idea of predator-prey. So you have two different butterflies, one butterfly being the poisonous one, the other one just being a mimic of it. And then another type of symbiotic interactions would be commensalism. So this is where one organism gets benefits out of it and another gets very little to no effect from the relationship. The idea, or one example would be like a small plant growing under the shade of a large plant, a barnacle on a whale, very little interactions between the two organisms. And here are just some images of some different relationships. So here's some small little amphipods on a, what is it called? A sculp or a selp, which is like a aquatic organism. Okay, when we look at communities and basically plant communities over time, there are a variety of ways that those begin. So you have primary succession, which is really a ecosystem being developed directly from just kind of like a clean slate. So that would be like just exposed granite, or where there's no topsoil, there's no starting material, and so you have to start basically from scratch to then build an ecosystem. Secondary succession is when there's been a disturbance, but there are some of the initial building blocks are already present. So a good example of secondary succession is the regrowth that occurs in a forest after a significant forest fire. So you've got very little plant life there, but you've got plenty of topsoil and nutrients in preparation for that secondary succession to build up. When you think of primary succession, the initial change in an ecosystem comes from pioneer species, or species that come in early on and take root and start the process of building topsoil. So you think, so most of these would be like herbs or plants that die out each season, leaving seeds, and often seeds can blow in from pioneer species to kind of take root. Dandelions are a good example of pioneer species, and other small plants. So this diagram is in your textbook, and you can just kind of look at it, but just moving from exposed rock to lichen, and then eventually to a fully established forest. Example of lichen on a tundra rock, and lichen is actually a really interesting plant because it's a combination of algae and fungus that move towards chemically break down solid rock into eventually soil and nutrients. Another example, so this would be an example of secondary succession where you had topsoil, but then you have some type of disturbance that exposes topsoil, and then it comes back into play. And then these are just some examples of aspects of a secondary succession example. So here's like a nurse log. So you have a large tall tree that falls, and it actually supports the regrowth of that forest coming back into play. And then some of the things that control the rate of succession or growth in a forest would be facilitations. Those would be organisms or conditions that support succession to continue forward into developing. Another kind of opposite effect to succession would be inhibition, and inhibition would be organisms that actually slow the change of a ecosystem to a more mature state. So an example would be there's some tree plants, I think it's aspen maybe, that give off in their root system a chemical that deters coniferous trees from taking root. So they actually stop coniferous forests from developing, because typically you go from a deciduous forest to a conifer forest. That's going to be your more mature ecosystem, and so the aspens actually give off a chemical inhibitor that slows the rate of conifer forest development. And then tolerance is, when you think of an ecosystem's tolerance, how capable is it from being affected by change, or things that control the overall success of that force being able to adapt to inputs. Right, some of the things that affect the stability or sustainability of a forest would be disturbances, so whether it being human-made disturbances or forest fires or lightning strikes or natural disasters. You know, what makes ecosystems dynamic is disturbances opening up new niches, pushing certain species out. One of the kind of concepts there would be climax communities. So when an ecosystem kind of hits its peak of maximum, maximum species tolerance, be able to hold that together. Inertia is the idea of directionality as things are moving. How well are things maintained within an ecosystem would be the idea of constancy, the ability or the stability of the ecosystem from those inputs, and resilience is also related to that. How well can it handle kind of changes over time? And when thinking of an ecosystem, when thinking of the long-term health of that system, really the precautionary principle should be adopted at most turns, because it's just the idea of awesome. And then, so when you think of like an aquatic system here that's exampled in this graph, you have a stream, and you think of the number of individuals able to survive within that. So a polluted stream really limits how many species can exist within that. So it causes that ecosystem to decline in its ability to function. And this graphic isn't going to work, and neither is that one. So that's it for today. You have a quiz tomorrow. You also have a practice, kind of a vocab quiz that you're going to do right now.